Hey everyone, my name is Cathy Dean of thecathydean.com, and I am so excited to be here with you today and to talk about something that I have become very passionate about, and that is teaching others how to boost their website traffic with Google Web Stories. So before I get into that, I want to tell you a little about myself. Back in early 2019, I was a newbie blogger wanting to grow an online business, and for me, it was all about the freedom to work from anywhere. In fact, I tell people all the time, I blog so I don't have to get a real job. Fast forward to 2022, and I have a successful online business that includes 3 websites. 2 I created from scratch and 1 that I purchased. And the title of blogger doesn't really encompass what I am now. I'm also a YouTuber, social media influencer, a content creator with a slight TikTok addiction. And now I'm adding online course creator to my repertoire, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. When I first started blogging, Pinterest was the end-all be-all of easy organic traffic. It was the good old days. But for the last couple of years, Pinterest has gone from being a quick win to a long game, more like Google SEO. That doesn't mean that Pinterest isn't a good platform for traffic. It's just that it's not the same quick win that it used to be. Pinterest remains the primary traffic driver for one of my websites, and so it will continue to be one of my traffic strategies. However, I also realized that I needed to diversify my traffic strategy. And I also want to see if there was still a way to get some of those quick wins in traffic. I know from personal experience that if you don't have the occasional quick win, blogging can become very frustrating very quickly. And it may feel like you just can't catch a break, much less gain any real traction with your website. Well, in early 2021, I started hearing rumblings about Google's new feature, Google Web Stories. Like so many other bloggers, I did a big eye roll and thought it was ridiculous that Google was trying to jump on the vertical story type content bandwagon to compete with TikTok and IG Reels. And remember, I told you I'm a slight TikTok addict, so I was well into TikTok by the time I started hearing about Google Web Stories. I created one web story for S&Gs, but then didn't look at it again for several months when the topic of web stories started coming up again and again in blogging groups. Then the ad service I'm with, Mediavine, wrote a few articles about Google Web Stories, which piqued my interest because if Mediavine was starting to make Google Web Stories for their own blogs, and they were encouraging their publishers to look into it as well, then maybe it was time for me to circle back around. So I decided to give Google Web Stories a real shot. But before I move on with my personal experience, you may be wondering what exactly is a Google Web Story. Well, Google defines web stories as visually rich, full-screen content for the mobile web, which allows you to tap or swipe through the slides. In layman's terms, it's vertical content in the form of slides with images or videos that users can swipe through, similar to Facebook, Snapchat, or IG stories. But what sets Google Web Stories apart from other platforms is that they are hosted on your own website. This means that you own the content. You don't have to worry about losing all your hard work due to an account suspension. So how do you get started with web stories? It's really simple for WordPress users because Google created a Google Web Story plugin that is free to download and free to use, and can be found by searching Google Web Stories from the Add New Plugin section on your WordPress dashboard. Now, back to my experience with Google Web Stories. I started researching online for as much information as I could find and tried to find tutorials, but unfortunately the information was pretty limited beyond the how to start making web stories information. I finally came across a YouTube video created by a fellow food blogger who showed her process of making web stories for her recipes, and that gave me what I needed to get started. I committed to doing 3 web stories per week, starting with my high traffic articles and high RPM articles. Things did not take off right away. In fact, my first small bump in traffic didn't happen for over 2 weeks. And then another spike happened 3 weeks later. Then I started getting some pretty steady traffic from Google Web Stories with the occasional big spike in traffic. Now, I know a big concern for many content creators when it comes to Google Web Stories is how long the web story will actually last and drive traffic back to your website. It's a valid concern. These take more time to create than static images for social media, and so if the traffic is one and done, is it really worth it? So when you see a spike in traffic from a single web story, that traffic spike usually lasts between 24 to 72 hours, and that's kind of the norm. However, I've had a traffic spike last for a couple of weeks. Oftentimes, the spike in traffic is one and done, but sometimes, after it dies back down from the initial spike, you'll see the web story come back around again. A perfect example of this is my web story on oven-baked chicken wings. This particular story was published on September 29th. The first round of traffic didn't hit for 2 whole weeks, but when it did hit on October 13th, it drove a good amount of traffic for the related article for nearly 3 weeks. Then it died off for about a month, then started driving traffic again. This second go around was not as much traffic, but it consistently drove traffic for the next 2 months before dying off again. This Google Web Story received a total of over 6,700 views. Of that, nearly 4,700 people clicked through to the related article. That is a 70% click-through rate, I think the highest rate I've had to date. On top of that, the realized ad revenue was $237. Now, these stats may not seem like huge numbers to some people, but this was only for a single web story. And I've created many more web stories, and I'll keep creating more. Much about what I've learned about using Google Web Stories as a traffic strategy for my website has come through piecing together information I have found online, which is pretty scattered and not as comprehensive as I would like to see. Knowing how frustrating it can be to piece together bits of information, I decided to compile everything I've learned about Google Web Stories into a full and comprehensive course that I'm calling Google Web Stories Masterclass. In this course, I cover the initial setup, how to create a web story, the design elements available in the web story plugin. I have 3 full demo walkthroughs for the different ways to create a web story. I talk about the best practices, monetizing web stories, how to repurpose content for web stories, and an FAQ section to answer the most commonly asked questions. Plus, I also have an affiliate program available to students of the course with a 40% commission. And of course, I have created a private group on Facebook for additional support, which is linked in the first module of the course. Now, I just launched this course, so if you are seeing this video before April 30th, 2022, you get to jump in on my grand opening sale. A direct link with the grand opening discount code already applied can be found in the description box below. If you have any questions that are not answered on the sales page, feel free to email me at hello@thecathydean.com. I hope you have an amazing day, and I look forward to helping you grow and succeed with Google Web Stories.